My dad raised his glass at my brother's wedding and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's just a security guard." Laughter rippled through the room, knives hidden in every chuckle. I sat frozen, my chest burning, while whispers spread like wildfire. How embarrassing! Her own family. For years I had carried them, sacrificed for them, only to be stripped of dignity in front of strangers. My hands trembled under the table, but my eyes refused to drop. And then, before I could breathe, someone shouted, "Holy shit, she's on the news!" Every head snapped toward the giant screen. My name is Claire Donovan, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the one who patched the cracks in a family that never truly wanted me whole. My mother died when I was 8, leaving behind a silence in the house that my father filled too quickly with a new wife. I had barely learned to braid my own hair before I was braiding the hair of my baby half-brother, Ryan, while my stepmother looked on as if it were my duty, not hers. From then on, it always was my duty. I cooked dinners, cleaned the house, and soothed Ryan's cries while my father built a new life that seemed to erase the memory of the old one. If there were bills to pay, I was the one who stayed up late figuring them out. If Ryan needed new clothes for school, I gave up my allowance. When he wanted to try out for soccer, I worked an extra shift at the diner. I sacrificed college because my father said we couldn't afford tuition for 2. Guess whose dreams were chosen to be shelved? Mine. Ryan went to business school while I pulled long nights at jobs no one else wanted. I told myself that was love, that family meant sacrifice. I told myself that if I gave enough, they would finally see me. But years passed, and every gesture of love was swallowed by their expectation, every piece of myself taken for granted. I became invisible, the quiet shadow that kept the household running. My father only saw me when I was useful, and when I wasn't, I was a reminder of the woman he'd lost and wished to forget. Ryan, on the other hand, was the golden child, handsome, charismatic, ambitious. He never had to ask twice for anything. My father doted on him, my stepmother beamed with pride at every minor achievement. The same chores I had done at his age were beneath him. The same grades I had once brought home were considered average, but from Ryan, they were celebrated. And when he found his path into the world of business, everyone praised his brilliance, though I knew where his first real funding had come from. My savings, scraped together through sleepless nights of overtime and shifts I barely survived. I gave him that money when he came to me, eyes wide with desperation, saying, "Claire, you're the only one I can trust. Just a small loan to get my startup moving. I'll pay you back, I swear." I didn't hesitate. I handed it over, even though it was my emergency fund, the only safety net I had. He never repaid me. Instead, he rewrote history, telling people his success was built on his grit, his brilliance, his perseverance. My name never passed his lips. By the time he announced his engagement to the daughter of a wealthy magnate, I should have known what role I'd play in the celebration. A seat in the shadows, a name left out of the stories. Ryan had become the shining figure in our family narrative, while I remained the supporting character, blurred in the background. But it wasn't just the erasure that stung. It was the deliberate contempt, the way he looked at me now with the same disdain my father carried, as though my sacrifices were stains rather than scars. I remember one evening, weeks before the wedding, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. He had his laptop open, talking on the phone about contracts and deals, barely acknowledging me. When he hung up, I asked quietly, "Do you remember the money I lent you, Ryan? I could use it back now." He smirked, leaned back and said, "Come on, Claire, that was years ago. Besides, you're doing fine. Security guard work is steady, right? You should be grateful you've got stability. Not everyone is cut out for more." His words sliced through me sharper than any blade. Gratitude for being overlooked, for being minimized, for being reduced to the scraps of dignity left behind. I swallowed the lump in my throat, realizing then that repayment was never coming, not in money, not in acknowledgement, not in love. My father's silence only confirmed it. He sat there, nodding at Ryan, ignoring the way my face burned. His loyalty was always clear, and it was never to me. My stepmother chimed in about how proud she was of Ryan's hard work, how lucky we all were that he had elevated the family's status. Elevated, on the foundation of my broken back, my empty savings, my wasted youth. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself again the same lie I had repeated for decades. If I give enough, they will see me. But deep down, the truth had already taken root. They would never see me. They didn't want to. The day of the wedding was coming, and I tried to prepare myself for the small humiliations I knew were waiting. But what I didn't know was that humiliation had grown bold, hungry, and it wanted to devour me whole. I didn't know then that this wedding wouldn't just strip me of dignity. It would strip them of everything they thought was untouchable. And when the last glass of champagne fell, the world would finally see who I truly was. The envelope arrived 2 weeks before the ceremony, cream-colored with gold lettering, the kind of invitation that whispered wealth. My name was on it, but not where it mattered. I scanned the embossed print, looking for acknowledgement, some hint that I was part of the family being celebrated. Instead, I found myself listed at the very bottom, almost like an afterthought. No, with guest. No mention of recognition. Just Claire Donovan. Alone. I pressed the invitation flat against the table, tracing the names of Ryan and his bride-to-be with my fingertip. The grandeur of their union was meant to shine, and I was meant to stand outside the glow, a shadow who should be grateful simply to be allowed in. When I asked my father about it, hoping maybe it was a mistake, he dismissed me with the same cold practicality he always carried. "Claire," he said, adjusting his cufflinks as if my presence were already a burden. "This wedding is important. The family we're joining is prestigious, respectable. We can't afford distractions. You'll come, of course, but just sit quietly. Don't draw attention to yourself. Don't make us look bad." My mouth went dry. "Make you look bad?" I whispered. "For being who I am?" He didn't answer, only gave me a look that said more than words ever could. Yes. That was exactly what he meant. That night, I sat on my bed with the invitation clutched in my hand, feeling its edges cut into my skin. I wanted to rip it apart, throw it into the trash. But I didn't. Instead, I tucked it back into its envelope. A strange thought gnawed at me. Maybe this was my chance. Not to be seen by them, but to finally see them clearly. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm. The venue was a glittering ballroom, every corner dripping in opulence, chandeliers casting golden light, tables draped in silk, waiters gliding between guests with trays of champagne. The air reeked of money and power. And there I was, in a simple navy dress, the best I could afford. I told myself it was enough. The seating chart confirmed what I had already known in my gut. My name pushed to the margins. I found my place near the restrooms. So far from the center, I might as well have been invisible. When I sat down, the woman next to me gave me a polite smile, then leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Is she staff? Should she be seated here?" The words stabbed, though she hadn't meant them cruelly. She was only reflecting what everyone thought, that I didn't belong. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to react. If I left then, I would prove them right. The ceremony blurred by in a haze of polished vows and polished smiles. Ryan stood at the altar, beaming with the arrogance of a man who believed the world had bent itself to his will. I watched him, remembering the nights he had come to me with empty hands, begging for help. I wondered if he even remembered those moments now, or if he had rewritten them in his mind to cast himself as the hero. When the reception began, I tried to fade into the background, sipping water from a glass that never seemed to empty. But whispers found me anyway, floating across the tables. "That's his sister? She looks so plain. I heard she works security. Can you imagine?" Thank God Ryan turned out so different. Each word lodged itself inside me, heavy as stone. Then came the toast. My father rose, champagne flute in hand, the spotlight finding him as naturally as it always had. His voice carried over the crowd, smooth and confident. "Tonight," he began, We celebrate not only the union of two wonderful families, but also the remarkable success of my son, Ryan. He is a man of ambition, of vision, of promise. Applause followed, echoing through the hall. I sat rigid, waiting for his words to reach me, to acknowledge even the smallest part I had played. Instead, he turned his eyes to my table, smirk curling his lips. And of course, we mustn't forget my daughter. She's just a security guard. Laughter burst out, a chorus of ridicule disguised as amusement. Champagne glasses clinked, shoulders shook with mirth. My face burned hot, my chest tightening with shame so sharp it was almost physical. I wanted to vanish into the floor, to run and never look back. My hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Every fiber of me screamed to leave, to end the humiliation. I pushed back my chair slightly, my legs trembling as I prepared to stand. And then, something in me stilled. A quiet voice inside whispered, "Not yet, not here, not like this." I froze in place, the laughter still ringing in my ears. My father lifted his glass higher, basking in his own cruelty, while Ryan laughed along, proud to watch me crumble. I thought I knew humiliation, but this was its final brutal form. I intended to walk out. I intended never to look back. But just before I could move, the night shifted, and when it did, none of us would ever be the same. The laughter was still echoing when the scrape of a chair cut through it. At first, I thought it was another guest shifting in their seat, maybe moving away from me as though humiliation were contagious. But when I looked up, I saw a tall man rising slowly from a table much closer to the front. His presence seemed to bend the attention of the room, the way the moon pulls the tide. He wasn't smiling. He walked toward me with deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving mine. My heart stuttered. I had seen powerful men before, Ryan's new father-in-law among them, but this was different. This man carried authority like armor, heavy and undeniable. Whispers started as he approached, people leaning toward each other, trying to place his face. He stopped at my table, right beside my trembling chair, and to my astonishment, he reached down and took my hand. His grip was warm, steady, grounding me as though I were standing on the edge of a cliff. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice slicing through the silence. "She is not just a security guard," he said firmly. "She is the reason I'm alive today." The room hushed, confusion flashing across the faces of guests who had been laughing seconds earlier. Even my father froze, his champagne glass suspended midair. Ryan's smirk faltered. The man, Daniel Hayes, though I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud yet, continued, "2 years ago, I was in a grocery store when a gunman opened fire. Chaos broke out. People ran. I was trapped behind a shelf, certain I wouldn't make it. And then this woman, this very woman you've just ridiculed, shielded me and others, guiding us to safety. She put herself in the line of fire when no one else would." A stunned gasp rippled through the crowd. I blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile the memory. I remembered that night, the ringing of gunshots, the frantic shouts, the blur of faces I dragged out of danger. I had never asked names. I had never known who they were, and now one of them was standing here, exposing a truth I had tucked away like a scar. My voice caught in my throat. "You?" He met my gaze, his eyes steady. "Yes, you saved me." For the first time that night, my chest loosened. It wasn't vindication, not yet, but it was something like oxygen after drowning. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their laughter curdling into silence, guilt pressing against their polished facades. Daniel straightened, still holding my hand as if daring anyone to laugh again. "So, when you say she's just a security guard," he added, his tone sharp as a blade, "you diminish the courage that kept me and countless others alive." The ballroom seemed to shrink around us, the weight of his words pressing against every corner. I caught sight of my father's face, stiff, pale, lips pressed thin as though the glass in his hand had turned to acid. Ryan's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but there was none. Before anyone could respond, the massive screen at the front of the room flickered. The band had paused, unsure whether to keep playing, and in the lull, the television feed cut in. A news anchor's urgent voice filled the hall. "Breaking news tonight. Security guard Claire Donovan is being hailed as a hero after preventing a mass tragedy earlier this morning. Sources confirm she rescued more than 30 civilians from a bombing at Midtown Center." My image appeared on the screen, my uniform stained with dust, my arms guiding terrified families to safety. Cameras had caught everything, and now the world was seeing it. Now this room was seeing it. Gasps swelled around me, chairs creaking as guests craned their necks to stare at the giant screen. The same mouths that had twisted in ridicule now hung open in shock. Some covered their faces, others whispered frantically, names and reputations spinning in their minds as they realized the depth of their mistake. Daniel's hand tightened gently around mine. Then, in a calm voice that carried sharper than any shout, he said, "By the way, my name is Daniel Hayes. My company holds a multi-million-dollar contract with the Whitmore family." He glanced at the bride's father, whose complexion had drained to chalk. "I value loyalty, integrity, and respect, and I'm not certain I can continue doing business with those who humiliate the very people who embody those qualities." The words detonated like another bomb, but this one was social, financial, devastating in a different way. A murmur rose as people processed what he had just said. The bride's father shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between me, Daniel, and Ryan. The atmosphere thickened with fear, the kind that seeps in when money and reputation are at stake. I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden shift. Just moments before, I had been the target of every sneer in the room. Now, those same eyes avoided mine, as though looking at me might scorch them. I wanted to speak, to explain, but the words tangled in my throat. My life had always been lived in silence, in sacrifice. To be defended so openly, so fiercely, left me disoriented, raw. My pulse hammered in my ears, my breath uneven. I wasn't sure if I wanted to cry or to scream, but Daniel didn't let go of my hand. His grip anchored me, told me without words, "Stand tall. They're the ones trembling now." And they were. I saw the fear in Ryan's eyes, the panic behind my father's composure, the desperation tightening the bride's father's jaw. They had built their world on arrogance, on the assumption that people like me would always bow, always shrink. And in one night, in one breath, that world was beginning to crumble. They were starting to fear me. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The room was still reeling from Daniel's words, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the news broadcast looping on the giant screen. I stood motionless, caught between disbelief and a strange sense of weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, my father and brother weren't towering above me. They were shrinking. Daniel finally released my hand, but his presence didn't leave me. His gaze lingered, steady and reassuring, and in that look I felt a recognition deeper than gratitude. He had known me before this night, long before this humiliation. My mind flashed back to a dimly lit break room 2 winters ago. I had been pulling a double shift at the security desk of a downtown office building. Exhaustion weighed on me like chains. My body ached, and hunger gnawed at my stomach. When my shift ended, I found only one sandwich left in the communal fridge. I reached for it, then stopped when I noticed a janitor sitting at the corner table, eyes cast down, clearly too embarrassed to take it first. Without thinking, I handed it to him, forcing a smile despite my hollow belly. What I hadn't realized then was that Daniel Hayes had been watching from the doorway. Not the billionaire he appeared tonight, but a man in a plain coat, quietly observing. He had been finalizing a property deal in that very building and had arrived late, slipping into the break room unnoticed. He saw me choose kindness over comfort, sacrifice over survival. Later I learned he asked about me. A guard had mentioned my name, how I always covered extra shifts, how I carried responsibilities no one else would. Daniel never forgot. Now, in this glittering ballroom, the truth burned in his eyes. He hadn't come here tonight by accident. He hadn't simply stumbled into Ryan's wedding. He had chosen to be here, chosen to step into my humiliation, prepared to shield me if the family who should have protected me turned instead into executioners of my dignity. "You don't owe me anything," I whispered, still stunned, still struggling to understand. His lips curved into a faint smile. "On the contrary, Claire, I owe you my life. And more than that, I owe you the respect you've always deserved." The words landed with a force that rattled me. Respect. It was something I had lived without for so long that hearing it felt foreign, almost frightening. My throat tightened. For years, I had swallowed insults and worn invisibility like armor. Now, for the first time, someone powerful spoke my worth aloud, and it left me trembling. Across the room, the Whitmore family, the bride's family, was in visible panic. The father's face had gone red, his composure cracking as the implications sank in. Losing Daniel Hayes as a partner wasn't just a financial inconvenience. It was a potential collapse. Their empire leaned heavily on his contracts. Suddenly, the same people who had ignored me, mocked me, or whispered behind my back began to shift tactics. The bride herself approached me, her smile tight, her voice syrupy. "Claire, we are so honored to have you here tonight. Truly, it's an inspiration. I can't believe we didn't know sooner." Her father soon followed, his hand outstretched, sweating. "Miss Donovan, please, let's put the past behind us. Tonight should be about family, about unity. We'd love to get to know you better." Their words slid over me like oil, slick and insincere. It was not admiration. It was fear disguised as flattery. And then came the ones I had dreaded most, my father and Ryan. My father approached first, his shoulders squared as if bracing for battle, but his eyes betrayed him. "Claire," he said, voice low. "Perhaps I misspoke." I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Didn't mean it? I had heard the relish in his tone, the way he basked in the laughter at my expense. My silence cut deeper than any retort could. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Ryan tried next, his voice strained with false warmth. "Claire, hey, look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot tonight. You know I've always appreciated you. Maybe we can talk privately? Work things out?" I stared at him. This brother for whom I had sacrificed everything, who had borrowed my money, my time, my love, only to erase me from his story. For the first time, I saw not the golden child, not the chosen son, but a desperate man clinging to an empire of lies that was beginning to collapse. My chest rose and fell, the room spinning slightly as I realized what was happening. For years, I had begged for their acknowledgement, their approval, their love, and now here it was, poured out not from sincerity, but from desperation. Tears prickled at my eyes, though I blinked them back quickly. Not from sadness, not even from relief, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I was trembling, my hands unsteady. I wasn't used to being treated with reverence, even if it was hollow. The shift in power unsettled me almost as much as the humiliation had. They thought I would fold. They thought, after years of being starved of recognition, I would grab at the crumbs they offered. They thought fear and flattery could undo decades of cruelty. They thought wrong. I looked at them, my father, my brother, the Whitmores, and though my lips never moved, my silence roared louder than words. I have changed, and I am no longer yours to break. They imagined this was the beginning of reconciliation, but for me, it was the beginning of something else entirely. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within hours of Daniel's declaration, word spread like wildfire across the city's business circles. The Whitmores, once untouchable, were suddenly radioactive. Investors pulled back, contracts dissolved, partners vanished, and at the center of the storm was Ryan, his wedding day unraveling faster than the champagne could be poured. The first crack came when the bride herself disappeared. One moment she was by Ryan's side, her hand clasped in his. The next, she slipped out of the ballroom, her gown a flash of ivory disappearing through the doors. Her family followed soon after, muttering excuses, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might ask why. The union that was meant to elevate Ryan into high society crumbled before the cake was even cut. The guests, once eager to bask in the glamour of the Donovan-Whitmore alliance, began to murmur, their curiosity souring into judgment. Some slipped out discreetly, others stayed only to witness the spectacle of a downfall in real time. Then came the blow that cemented it all. Reporters had gathered outside, tipped off by the breaking news broadcast that had interrupted the reception. Daniel, ever calculated, stepped before the microphones as the crowd spilled from the ballroom. Cameras flashed as he announced in clear, unwavering tones, "Claire Donovan is not just a hero tonight. She is the true hero of this city. While others hid, she put herself between innocent lives and certain death. That is who she is. That is who you laughed at." The soundbite traveled faster than any rumor, broadcast across televisions and phones before Ryan could even catch his breath. Headlines shifted instantly. Billionaire praises security guard as city's hero. Donovan family humiliates their own daughter at wedding. The contrast was too sharp, too damning to ignore. Inside the ballroom, Ryan stood frozen, his hands empty where a bride should have been, his name now a punchline. His friends avoided him, whispering as they backed away. The same people who had toasted him hours earlier now kept their distance, unwilling to be caught in the collapse. My father fared no better. His smug smile had evaporated, replaced by a grimace of despair as he realized the ridicule was turning outward, directed at him. For years he had prided himself on appearances, on the illusion of control. Now, society mocked him openly. The man who mocked his own daughter, only to be exposed on live television. His legacy was becoming a cautionary tale, one whispered with pity and scorn. I watched it unfold with a strange detachment. The pain of their betrayal still lingered, heavy and raw, but their downfall did not fill me with joy. Not yet. I didn't feel triumph as Ryan's empire collapsed or as my father's reputation crumbled. I felt only a hollow ache, the kind that comes from realizing that even in their ruin, they were incapable of love. The night dragged on, each humiliation compounding. By the time the last guests drifted away, the ballroom resembled a battlefield. Champagne flutes overturned, confetti scattered, silence echoing where music once played. Ryan sat slumped at a table, his tie undone, his face pale with disbelief. My father paced near the doors, muttering to himself, too proud to admit defeat, yet too broken to fight. I lingered on the edge, my body tense, my mind whirling. A part of me wanted to reach out, to ease their suffering out of habit, out of the reflex that had guided me my entire life. But another part of me, the part that had been buried under years of neglect and cruelty, held me still. They had never reached out for me. They had never eased my pain. And now, as they faced the consequences of their arrogance, I realized I had no obligation to carry them anymore. Outside, the reporters were still waiting, cameras flashing, voices shouting my name. I wasn't invisible anymore. The city saw me, recognized me, even celebrated me. Yet inside, the broken pieces of my family lay scattered, shards of the life I had once tried so hard to hold together. My chest tightened, not with pride, but with grief. Grief for the years wasted, for the love that had never been returned, for the family I had lost long before this night. I let myself feel it, just for a moment, before the ache hardened into resolve. I turned to look at them one last time, my father with his desperate eyes, Ryan with his trembling hands. They thought I would soften. They thought I would step back into the role I had always played, the fixer, the savior, the silent supporter. But I was done being their safety net. They would drown in the tides they created, and I would no longer reach for them. They thought I would come back to rescue them, but this time I would let them sink. When I finally stepped out of the ballroom, the night air wrapped around me like a balm. The sharp scent of rain lingered in the city air, though the pavement was dry, as if the storm had passed without leaving a trace. Cameras flashed instantly, voices shouting my name, reporters jostling for position. For the first time, they weren't calling for Ryan. They weren't looking for my father. They were looking for me. It was dizzying. I had lived so long in shadows that the sudden blaze of attention felt unreal, like stepping into a dream I hadn't dared to imagine. Questions flew at me. How did you do it? Were you afraid? What do you want to say to the city tonight? I tried to answer, my voice trembling but clear. I told them I was no hero, only someone who had done what needed to be done. But even as I spoke, a weight lifted from me, piece by piece, until I could breathe again. Behind me, the ballroom doors slammed, muffling the chaos still brewing inside. My father's voice had been the last I heard before I left, pleading, furious, broken, all at once. Ryan's silence had been heavier than any words. I didn't need to look back to know what their faces held: ruin, regret, and the bitter taste of consequences. I walked a few steps away from the flashing lights and found myself beside Daniel. He hadn't left my side since the moment he stood for me in that room. Now he looked at me with the quiet steadiness of someone who understood the cost of survival. His voice was low, meant only for me. "Sometimes justice comes late," he said, his lips curving faintly. "But it always comes." The words undid me. I didn't cry from anger, nor from vengeance, but from the raw relief of release. Tears blurred my vision as I let out a shaky laugh, my chest heaving. For once, I wasn't crying because of them. I was crying because I was free. In that moment, I wasn't the dutiful daughter, the overlooked sister, or the invisible shadow. I was simply Claire Donovan. And that was enough. The following days unfolded with ruthless efficiency. News outlets replayed the footage of the wedding humiliations side by side with the story of the bombing I had helped prevent. Public opinion was swift and unforgiving. My father, once a respected figure in local circles, became a pariah. Ryan, stripped of his bride, his fortune, and his reputation, drifted aimlessly as former friends distanced themselves. Their names became synonymous with arrogance and betrayal. At first, I thought their suffering might satisfy me. But watching from a distance, I realized it didn't bring joy. It brought clarity. Their downfall wasn't mine to savor. It was theirs to endure. I had already lost too many years waiting for scraps of love. I wouldn't waste another moment feeding on their ruin. Instead, I began to rebuild. Invitations came for interviews, opportunities I had never dreamed of. People wanted to hear my story, to celebrate courage where once there had been only silence. I accepted some, declined others, careful not to let this sudden attention consume me. I wasn't seeking fame. I was seeking peace. Yet the ghosts of my family lingered. One afternoon, as I stepped out of a studio, a reporter pushed forward with a question sharper than the rest. "Claire," she called, her microphone thrust toward me, "do you forgive your father and brother for what they did?" The world seemed to pause. Cameras angled closer, pens hovered above notepads, waiting. I felt the weight of the question settle on me, heavier than any insult I had endured. Forgiveness had been the chain around my neck for years, the hope that if I forgave enough, they would love me back. I drew in a breath, steadying myself. Then I answered, "I don't hate them anymore," I said slowly, the truth shaping itself as I spoke. "But they will have to live with what they did. That's their burden, not mine." The silence that followed was electric, then broken by a chorus of gasps and scribbling pens. The cameras caught it, and by nightfall, my words were everywhere. Some called them harsh, others called them brave. But for me, they were simply honest. As the crowd dispersed, I stood quietly on the sidewalk, the city lights flickering around me. I thought of Ryan and my father, sitting in the ruins of their pride, forced to look into mirrors they could no longer escape. And I thought of myself, standing alone, but no longer lonely. The journey had been brutal, filled with betrayals I would carry as scars, yet in the end, those scars had not destroyed me, They had carved me into someone stronger, someone free. I lifted my head to the night sky, inhaled the sharp air, and let the final truth settle in my heart. Sometimes, letting go is the greatest form of justice. And as I walked away, the cameras still chasing my silhouette, I knew the story was no longer theirs to tell. It was mine,